All right, so welcome to Unit 3, and so the first lesson in Unit 3 is about multiplying by 10, which you learned in elementary school, but turns out to be ridiculously important in 8th grade. So multiply those numbers by 10, 100, or 1,000. Well, 9 times 10 is 90, right? And 9 times 100 is, how many hundreds do you have? You have 900 when you have 9 times 10. So when you multiply by 10, you added a 0. When you multiplied by 100, you added 2 zeros. And so 9 times 1,000 must be 9,000. But it's a different rule when you multiply a decimal by 10, 100, 1,000. You cannot just add a 0. So see what happens when you multiply a decimal by 10, 100, or 1,000. Well, you get a row of zeros here. Then we're going to step over to multiply by this 1, right? So we get 1 times 2, 1 times 6, 1 times 5. We add up the two rows, and it looks like it's 5,620. But that's not correct because we have two numbers to the right of decimal points. We've talked about that. So we have to move that decimal back twice. So 56.2 times 10. Oh, I'm sorry, I wrote that wrong. 5.62 times 10 is 56.2. Okay, that was interesting. So let's do the next one. So you multiply by 10, or multiply by 0 here, and you get a row of zeros. You step over, you get another row of zeros. Now for that third row, you got to step over twice, right? And we're going to 1 times 2, 1 times 6, 1 times 5. Get 0, 0, add up the three rows, and then we're going to move the decimal twice again, and we get that. Interesting. So let's write this. 5.62 times 100 was 562. Okay. Now let's multiply by 1,000. So we get a row of zeros here. We step over, we get another row of zeros. We step over twice, and we get another row of zeros. And we step over a third time for the fourth row, and now we finally get the 2, the 6, and the 5, and we add up the three rows, and you get 0, 0, 0, 2, 6, 5. Still have to move the decimal twice, 1, 2, and now it turns out 5.62 times 1,000 is 5,620. Right? So the rule is not add a 0. Okay, that's not the rule, although it happened there for 1,000. That's not a rule either. What's going on? When you multiply by 10, you end up moving the decimal once that way. When you multiply by 100, you move it twice. When you multiply by 1,000, you move it 3 times, and we made an empty space, and now we add a 0. That's the actual rule for multiplying 10, 100, or 1,000. And that's actually what was happening in elementary school when you were multiplying by 10. You didn't know the rule then. But when you multiplied 9 times 10, it moved the decimal point once and you added a 0. Right? When you multiplied by 100, you moved the decimal twice and you added 2 zeros because there's 2 empty spaces. When you multiplied by 1,000, you moved the decimal 3 times. There were 3 empty spaces, so you added 3 zeros. So multiplying by 10, you move the decimal once, 100 twice, 1,000 3 times. So I've really just taught you the lesson. All right, but there it all is. You can see 9 times 10 and 5.62 times 10. We move the decimal once. For 100, in both cases, you move it twice. And for 1,000, in both cases, you move it 3 times. Okay, so let's make sure we understand place value. You learned place value in 6th and 7th grade. We're going to review it. So write each as a fraction. Well, 0.7. So how would you say that as a fraction? You would say 7 tenths. All right, so that's 7 tenths. All right, so what would that be? That would be 7 hundredths. Right? This, when the number ends in that first spot, it's over 10. When it ends in that second spot, it's over 100. And what's that? Hopefully you know that 7 thousandths. Right? Oh, and let me write that out. Right? That you say this denominator as 1,000, and then you add a THS on the end, 7 thousandths. All right, so what's that? That's 8 3/10. Right? This is where you say and in math, when the decimal point. What is that? That is 83 hundredths because it ends 2 places over. All right? And that one, therefore, must be, which ended 3 places over, just like the one above it, is 83 thousandths. So each place value is 10 times larger than the one to its right. So let's see that, right? 100 is 10 times bigger than 10. 1,000 is 10 times bigger than 100, yes? All right, so let's see this. So 3 times, we're going to multiply 10 times 0.03. So 3 times 0, 3 times 1. Now, we could step over and get a row of zeros here, totally unnecessary, but if you really wanted to, you'd get that. Now, but you may skip that step. We have 2 numbers to the right of decimal points. We move it back twice, and it turns out that 10 times 0.03 equals 0.3, right? We took the decimal point because we multiplied by 10 and moved it once and made 3/100ths into 3/10ths. Let's try this one. So 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 1 is 3. Move the decimal once. Let me be neater. And so 10 times 0.3 is 3, right? Because we've moved the decimal once. Every time you move multiply by 10, you move the decimal once. So do we really need to do all this work anymore? Hopefully we know not, because we're going to need that shortcut this year. That when we multiply by 10, we can just move the decimal over. So every time we're going to be moving the decimal to the right. Let's see this. So, right, we'll do this one the long way. Yes, you're going to use the shortcut though on your homework. The homework's going to go very fast if you learn the shortcut. So, right, we're moving the decimal twice there, but that's a different reason we're moving it there. So it turns out 4.72 times 10 equals 47.2, and we're not going to keep this extra 0. All right, so now let's not do that. Let's do the shortcut. All right, so we took 4.72 and we multiplied it by 10, we got 47.2. So now we're going to multiply it by 100. So what is it? It's 472. Well, we're not going to do all that work with all the rows of 0. 4.72 times 1,000, we got to move the decimal once, twice, empty space, so we put a 0 in there, and it's 4,000, comma, every 3 numbers from the end, 4,720. So that's your shortcut. All right, so use it. This is what you're doing in your homework. 9.2 times 10 must be 92. 8.413, which is 8 and 413 thousandths, times 10, right? You move it once. It's not move it to the end or some other rule. It's move it once for multiplying by 10. So that's 84 and 13/100ths. That right there. Multiply that times 100, move it twice. Fill in the empty space. 9 and 2/10 times 100, 920. 8 and 413 thousandths times 100. Now we're moving it twice, and we get 841.3, or 841 and 3/10ths. All right, now we're multiplying by 1,000. So we're going to move the decimal 3 times. 1, 2, 3. 2 empty spaces there, right? So 2 zeros and a comma is added, and it's 8,200. Hopefully that makes sense to you. 8 times 1,000 is 8,000. So 8.2 times 1,000 is 8,200. That's how it works. All right, 3 and 2,500, so 3.25. So we're going to move it 1, 2, 3, because we're multiplying by 1,000. We're going to fill in a 0 and then empty space, and we get 3,250. 45,000 times 1,000. Well, if it's 45 thousandths, right, it better be 45,000, right? That's how it works. Let's see, there's the decimal point at the end, right? If you don't see a decimal point, that's where it is. It's at the end. 1, 2, 3, you add 3 zeros in this case, and you get 45,000, right? 72 times 1,000, 72,000. Works that way. 9.3 times 10,000. So what do you think the rule is for multiplying by 10,000? Hopefully you're saying move it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, because 10,000 is 10 times bigger. So we moved it 4 times. We're going to get 3 zeros. So what number is that? 9.3 times 10,000, 93,000. All right, so which number is closest? Well, we're going to move it 1, 2, 3 times, and we get 9,032, so which is closest? 9,000. All right, so we're already at the practice. Nice short lesson, right? But very valuable. So you're doing all these before I put up the answers. So right as a fraction, that's 273 thousandths, because it's ends three. It's where it ends. It's not how many numbers there are. It's where it ends, right? And so this is 2 73 hundredths, right? Because it ends 2 places over. And this is 27 3/10 because it ends 1 place over from the decimal point. We multiply by 10 here, you move it once, you get 94. You multiply this by 10 once, you get 470. Right there you end up adding a 0. The one next to it not. But the real rule is you're moving the decimal once. Multiply by 100, you're moving it twice, 27. Multiply by 1,000, you're moving it 3 times. There's 2 zeros going to be there, so it's 56,200. All right, times 10,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to add 3 zeros because there's 3 empty spaces. 2.8 times 10,000 is 28,000. What do you think 100,000 is? You multiply by 100,000, you're moving it 5 times, right? There's 5 zeros. That is a shortcut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here you're going to have 4 zeros. Now put the comma in the right place, please. And what number is that? That's 720,000. So which number is closest? Multiply by 1,000, you go 1, 2, 3. So we're going to add 2 zeros here. And that's 740,100. It must be that one. Thanks.